Hey, everybody, and welcome to Time Out with Kevin Gallagher. A little bit of a different setup here. I know the lighting's a little bit dark. Not going to see too much of me during the broadcast anyway. But, folks, I'm Kevin Gallagher. Thank you for joining us on our program tonight. We are live here as we tape this, and normally you'll see us on a Friday night at 8:30 p.m. and also that's 11 a.m. on a Monday morning. So you can check that out here locally in Connecticut. Otherwise, anytime you want out on the web. And folks, we're here with Tim Kynes. He is a radio show host that is on the Truth Be Told Radio Network. He has a show called God Save the King. And we're going to be talking about an interesting subject tonight because what he specializes on is the time period of Christ and 2,000 years ago and everything that was going on. And there's a lot that I had come across when talking with him when we did a series of shows around Christmas time last year in 2021. We did, I think, 6 shows and never really repeated anything. And we took a different look at what was going on in the time period. So one of the fascinating aspects is that you have with Herod, and that's the Herod that you see in the Bible, and there's also his father. And I always forget that there's actually 2 different Herods, the father and the son. We're going to get into that tonight. It's a really interesting subject the deeper you get into it. But Tim, I wanted to say hello. You're actually here at my home. You're normally out in Pennsylvania.
That's correct.
And so you're here visiting, and we're doing some things with the radio network while you're here and thought we would tape this quick show for TV. So, Tim, welcome to the program and fill people in on some things about yourself and that radio show you do called God Save the King.
Certainly. Well, thank you for being here. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to be on the show, and frankly, a pleasure to be a guest in your home. What we can refer to on air as a secret undisclosed location that we're broadcasting from.
You're in the Attila the Hun chair.
Okay, yeah, there you go. And but my name is Tim Kynes. Okay, and for those of you that have a challenge pronouncing my name, it's like the I's in your head with a K in front of it. Kynes. Okay, I frequently pronounce it Keys, especially if I'm not going to know someone long enough to matter, because I also happen to be a piano player by trade. So I started being called Tim Keys a long time ago. So I answer to both. Okay. But my ministry and my website and my project is called God Save the King. And God Save the King is a tongue-in-cheek reference to what we're going to talk about today. And I'll tell you more of that story in a second. But the bottom line is God Save the King is about the nativity of Jesus Christ. As Kevin said, I am an expert on the time of Christ, but really what I'm an expert on is the time of Christ's birth. Is what I'm really an expert on, especially from about 50 years before his birth up until he was born, because it is the backstory that turns the nativity into this really epic story that is really quite different from what we are used to seeing and hearing. We're used to seeing and hearing the traditional nativity story in our Christmas pageants and our nativity plays and our Christmas cards and our Christmas carols and stuff like that. And the sad truth is that's not what it looked like. I have gotten to the place now. I've done so much research over so much time, and I've had so many years to incrementally change my mind about this, which now you, if you're watching the show, listening to the show, this might be brand new to you. And like I said, I've had 35 years to change my mind. But the traditional Christmas story is Christian mythology. It's really just that simple. It's hardly any of it is true. In the very, very, very broad strokes, it's true. There's a few pieces of the puzzle that definitely happened. I mean, Joseph and Mary definitely traveled from Nazareth to Bethlehem. That's true. Okay. Herod tried to kill the baby Jesus. That's true. I take that back. See, that is how pervasive the traditional nativity story is. I said that Herod tried to kill the baby Jesus. He wasn't a baby anymore. He was a toddler. He was about 15 months old when Herod tried to kill him. And that's why Herod allowed a margin for error of up to 2 years old.
So
See?
let me stop
Wow.
you there and just say, hey, he I know in every biblical text that you look at, it is saying that Jesus was a toddler. There's different words for toddler in the Greek than there are for infant, and so that's how we know that. And
Hmm.
also, you have other factors: how long it took the wise men, or what people would refer, the magi, who we refer
Hmm.
to as wise men, how long it would take them to journey. There's a whole bunch of factors, and the other thing is, why would Herod want to be so bothered by the fact that he was born that he would just try to kill him to begin with?
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's just launch right into that
Go right ahead.
well, for number one, this is where I get the name of my ministry,
Hmm.
God Save the King.
Hmm.
It's all about the contrast between the King of Kings, Jesus of Nazareth, and the Roman appointed King of Judea, Herod the Great. So it's this very tongue in cheek God Save the King, because God Save the King is a method by which it's a saying. Okay. You actually do find it in the Bible, but more commonly, you would have found it in the ages, both in ancient time and in the ages since then, where court officials and people at court around the king, in order to legitimately honor the king and or to flatter the king, would say things like, "Oh great king, live forever, God save the king." So
Hmm.
I, based upon what we're going to find out about Herod today, I think it's really a no-brainer that Herod had a lot of yes men who surrounded his throne and were fond of flattering him and saying, "Oh, great king, live forever. God save the king." But obviously, the reason that's a pun is because this pretender king is going to attempt to murder the King of Kings. So, what we really mean is, God save the king, King
Exactly.
Jesus. Yeah. So,
So let's just start off with this. I think maybe it's best to start with his father. So who was the father, Herod?
okay. Well, let's actually we'll do this. Let's jump to the son, and then
Okay.
we'll go back to the father and back to the father. Okay.
Okay.
So there are two Herods that are prominently mentioned in the Bible. The one that more people tend to be familiar with is Herod Antipas, who is the Herod that is connected to the crucifixion of Jesus. So that's Herod number one. Now, Herod number two is the Herod that we are focusing on, who is the father of Herod Antipas, who is known as Herod the Great. And he was the Roman appointed king of Judea from 37 BC until his death in 1 BC. And
Okay.
then the father of Herod the Great, his name wasn't Herod, his name was Antipater, but Antipater factors into the story. So it does make sense to mention him here and talk a little bit about who Antipater was as well.
Got it. Well, please continue.
Okay, well, let's start with exactly that, right? Let's actually back up a little further and get a little bit of a running start, and I'll tell you who Antipater was, and then therefore who Herod was, right? So we are well aware biblically that the nation of Israel was dominated by several foreign empires beginning in roughly 600 BC. The Babylonians conquered Israel first, then the Persians captured the Babylonians, and then the the Persians conquered the Babylonians, and then the Greeks conquered the Persians. So by the middle of this, and then the Romans are going to come next, which we'll get to, right? So Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome. So in the middle of the second century BC, Israel is under Greek hegemony, a fancy word that means under their rulership.
Yeah.
And the Greeks of that region of what would in the ancient world would have been called the Near East. They didn't call it the Middle East back then. They called it the Near East, and that would be the right immediately to the east of the Mediterranean. So what would be modern Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan. Not so much, although it's included, but not so much like Iran and Iraq, okay?
Mhm.
But mostly Asia Minor, Turkey, okay? Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel. That would what was referred to as the Near East. Okay, so the Greek rulers that were set up in that area, they controlled the Bible lands, and they had the Jews under their thumb, and they treated them with tremendous cruelty. And then by the middle of the 2nd century BC, a Syrian Greek ruler by the name of Antiochus IV, Antiochus Epiphanes, he actually basically declared Judaism illegal, is really what it boiled down to. He didn't declare the religion illegal, but he declared everything that they needed to do to practice their religion illegal. So effectively, he made it illegal by you couldn't you couldn't keep a copy of the Torah. That was illegal. Okay. You couldn't eat kosher food. That was illegal. Right. So he just is making a giant mess out of the Jews under his care, quote unquote. And the Jews just had a belly full of it. They couldn't take it anymore. And this is what gave rise to what is commonly referred to as the Maccabean Revolt. A man living in the town of Modin was asked to assist in a sacrifice of a pig, and he just went, nope, not doing it. So he killed the Jewish priest who was going along with it. He killed the Jewish priest, and then they killed the Greeks that were overseeing it. And then he and his sons rose up in rebellion and took out the entire Greek garrison that was stationed there and began this rebellion. And so the number one son of the father, his name was Judah Maccabee. So that's where we get the name. And most people know about Judah because Maccabee, translated from Hebrew, is supposedly means the hammer. So he was known as Judah the Hammer, Judah the Maccabee. And then it was this man whose name is escaping me at the moment. I can't believe it. I can't remember his name. I can't remember Judah's father's name. But he's the one who instigated the rebellion. Judah, his son, followed right with him. And then he had several brothers. Judah had several brothers. So they became the new de facto royalty of this little new independent kingdom called Judea. Now, I say little independent kingdom because that's exactly what I mean. It was not very big. It was only in and around Jerusalem for maybe 20 miles. It really wasn't all that big. But immediately Judah and his brothers who ruled after him, his son, his brothers, and then his brothers' sons who ruled after Judah, they immediately began to expand because in their mind, they're remembering the covenant. They're remembering the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and David, that unto your descendants I will give this land. And the land is stipulated in the book of Genesis as going from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates. So that's much bigger, number one, than even modern Israel. And then number two, way bigger than this little dot, around Jerusalem. But at any rate, like I said, Judah and his brothers and their sons, they became this new kind of de facto royalty, and they started to expand the kingdom. They expanded into Samaria. They expanded into Galilee. They expanded into Idumea, which is south of Judea, around the Dead Sea, and things like that. And when they conquered Idumea, now Idumea is the Latinized version of Edom. Okay.
Got it.
Now, traditional Edom is actually to the east of the Jordan, but the Edomites migrated. So by this point in time, Idumea is southern Israel, south of the Dead Sea. Okay. So you go through several generations of these Maccabean leaders, also known as the Hasmoneans, different name for the same group of people. You go through several generations and you get to the point in time roughly between about 75 BC and about 60 BC. And what you had happen at this point in time is you had the king, quote unquote, and I put that in air quotes because, see, after when they came back from the captivity, the Jews were allowed to reestablish temple worship. So they were allowed to reestablish the hereditary priesthood, but they were never allowed by the dominating government, whether it was the Persians or the Greeks. They were certainly never allowed to reestablish the hereditary monarchy. That was
right.
no way are we going to let you guys do that. So they had reestablished the hereditary priesthood, but not the hereditary monarchy. But now they've got this family, right? The Maccabees, the Hasmoneans, who are de facto royalty. They're acting like royalty. Initially, they only used the title high priest. They didn't initially use the title king. They simply used the title high priest. But like the third or fourth one in, by the time you got through 2 or 3 generations there, one of them, I think it was Aristobulus the first, actually took upon himself to call himself king. All right. And then you get a couple of generations later, Aristobulus died, and then the next king, I think, was John Hyrcanus. And John Hyrcanus died, and then it was his wife became queen. Ready for that? Okay, a lot of people are not aware of the fact that Israel had a queen in the early 1st century BC. But she had 2 sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II. And those 2 brothers initially were not old enough to be high priest, but once they were, the 2 of them started a war over the throne of Judea. They both wanted to be high priest. They both wanted to be king. So they went to war over the throne. And both of them initially appealed to Pompey Magnus, Pompey the Great, the Roman general, who was in charge of that part of the world for the Romans, right? You had the Roman province of Syria directly to the north, and the Romans therefore considered Judea to kind of like de facto kind of belong to them, right? So when Hyrcanus and Aristobulus were getting ready to fire up this shooting war, they both appealed to Pompey Magnus to, frankly, appoint them king and then to be the muscle that would back them up. And Pompey picked Hyrcanus. So he made his choice. But that, of course, inflamed Aristobulus. And this isn't part of our story immediately today, but it factors in. So we'll go ahead and mention it. Because once Pompey picked Hyrcanus, Aristobulus ran off to the Parthians to enlist their help in him trying to reclaim his throne.
And the Parthians are a group that everybody seems to forget about. You have the Greeks and the Romans, and they hardly get a mention, the Parthians, but they were a really big deal.
Right. They're a huge big deal. I'll take just a couple of minutes because we're trying to focus on Herod here. But when Alexander Great, quote unquote, conquered the known world, right, that meant all the way from the Mediterranean all the way to the Indus River in India, this huge, big, giant chunk of land.
Massive area.
Massive area. So when he died, his generals couldn't control it. It was just too big. So that area got appointed to a general named Seleucus. And Seleucus just could not maintain control over that giant region. So it didn't take very long for little independent regions to start popping up and declaring their independency from the Greeks, right? And one of the first, not the first, but one of the first was a province at the southeast corner of the Caspian Sea called Parthia. And Parthia declared their independence from Greek rule, and they rose up in rebellion, and they regained their independence. But then over the next 200 years, they steadily moved westward and reconquered everything that Alexander had conquered. So by the time you get to our story, at first, the Seleucids, right, the empire created by the general Seleucus, at first they were a buffer between Parthia and Rome. But with the Parthians moving steadily westward over a 200-year period of time, from roughly 200 BC, 250 BC to 50 BC, over that 200-year period of time, they reconquer everything conquered by Alexander to now, in our story, the frontier between Rome and Parthia is the Euphrates River in Asia Minor.
That's amazing.
So the Euphrates, by the way, it runs diagonally from southeast to northwest until it gets to the one point where it turns and goes pretty much due north. So that one section where it makes this straight up and down line, that was the frontier between Parthia and Rome. As a matter of fact, much later on, Augustus basically declared that was the border and that Romans would no longer attack across the Euphrates. Now that's 40 years down the line, but that came into the picture later. But this is the Parthians, right? So back to our story, you've got Queen Salome, and she has two sons, Hyrcanus II and Aristobulus II, two brothers, two princes who are at war for the throne of Judea. They both appeal to Rome initially. Rome picks Hyrcanus. So now Aristobulus takes off to the Parthians to try to get them to back him up. Okay. Now, meanwhile, back in Judea, this is now where Herod enters the picture. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because Hyrcanus had a court official named Antipater. And it's not a secret. I'll go ahead and spill the beans. Antipater is Herod's father. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But Antipater is an Idumean. So remember me mentioning Idumea a little while ago when the Maccabees reconquered, or not reconquered, when the Maccabees declared the independence of Judea, it was this teeny little kingdom, this teeny little dot. And then over the next several decades, they start to expand.
Mm-hmm.
And they go after Samaria, they go after Galilee, they go after Idumea. Now, the Idumeans, like I said, they are Edomites, which means they are descendants from Esau. Okay, the brother of Jacob, all the way back in Genesis in the Old Testament. And what does the Bible tell us about Jacob and Esau?
They didn't get along too well.
They didn't get along. Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated, right? So the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, the Idumeans, right? They're not very well liked by what are considered to be the true Jews. Okay.
Right.
So Antipater is not a Jew. He's an Edomite, right? But he is a court official in the court of Hyrcanus the Great. And the truth is that he's the real mover and shaker here. It's not even really Hyrcanus. Hyrcanus is almost a figurehead. It's really Antipater that is the true power. Okay. And so Antipater, like I love to joke about it. I love to say that if you look up the definition of ambition in the dictionary, it would be it's Antipater's picture. It's right there, right?
Yeah.
Just an extraordinarily ambitious dude. But now he knew. See, this is interesting. Talk about shrewd politics. Okay, and this is important because this is the backstory of God Save the King. This is the backstory of why it's called God Save the King. This is the whole point, right? Is you've got this shrewd political manipulator behind the scenes in the person of Antipater, and he's not eligible for the throne of Judea. He cannot rule Judea because he's not Jewish.
Right.
He can't do it, right? But he's super ambitious, so he doesn't care, right? So he manipulates things to the point where he gets two of his sons. He had several, but the two most important to our story are his eldest son, Faisal, and then his second son, Herod. Okay, so Antipater succeeds in getting Faisal appointed governor of Judea, of Jerusalem. Okay, and then he succeeds in getting Herod appointed governor of Galilee. Right? And this is fabulous because more of the backstory, by the way. Okay, so here's more of the backstory. Meanwhile, on the other side of the forest to all of this, you've got the civil war going on back in Rome. Okay, you've got Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus going to war for who is going to control the Roman Republic at that time, right? Caesar defeats Pompey, but then Caesar is very quickly assassinated after he becomes de facto emperor. He wasn't truly the first emperor, but that was the role he played. Augustus would become the first official emperor, but civil war between Julius Caesar and Pompey Magnus. Caesar wins. Caesar's in charge. Caesar gets assassinated. Okay. Caesar's allies, Octavian and Mark Antony, they go after Caesar's assassins. They win, right? And part of what happens is that actually I'm mixing the two stories up. Let me back up. So let me back up to Julius Caesar and Pompey. When the final battle was won, Pompey got out of Dodge really fast and he fled to Egypt, where he was promptly murdered when he arrived in Egypt. Okay. Caesar didn't like this very much because even though they were quote unquote enemies, they had been good friends for a long time. And he was very offended that Pompey was murdered upon his arrival in Egypt. So Caesar comes in right behind Pompey, right? Because what they're doing is, in addition to expanding Roman power, they're also mopping up the last of Alexander the Great's empire, right? The Seleucids, okay, which was named after the general Seleucus, who was the general in charge of Mesopotamia, right? He's out of the picture at this point. But the last remnant of Alexander's empire is the Ptolemaic Empire. This is Egypt, okay? Because this was another general of Alexander the Great named Ptolemy, and he was appointed to control Egypt, and it's his descendants that have sat upon the throne of Egypt for roughly the last 250 years.
Yes.
It's been Macedonian Greeks sitting on the throne of Egypt. That's very important for people to understand that Cleopatra, who was the last of the Ptolemies, she was actually the first of the Ptolemies to ever learn to speak Egyptian. They didn't even bother learning to speak the local language. They were Greeks and they ruled as Greeks, and that's what they were going to do. But at any rate, Pompey flees to Egypt. Caesar follows close behind, and then he starts consorting with Cleopatra. But he wasn't able to do that right away because, here you go, God save the king, right? It's all about these battles over the throne everywhere in the region. When Caesar arrives in Egypt, there's a civil war in Egypt, and it's between two siblings over the throne of Egypt, okay? So Caesar throws in with Cleopatra to back her for the throne, but it's her brother that is fighting against her. His army actually starts to win, and Caesar has just defeated Pompey, and now he's in a position where he's going to lose it in Egypt. And guess who comes to the rescue but a combined Jewish, Idumean, Sumerian, and Armenian army that's north of Israel, led by Antipater.
Wow.
Okay, so Antipater comes to Julius Caesar's rescue in Egypt with a Jewish army and an Armenian army that came from up north, right? And as a result,
the plot thickens.
The plot thickens. So as a result, Julius Caesar gives Antipater Roman citizenship and verifies the appointment of Faisal and Herod as governors of Judea and Galilee, right? He says, thus shall it be, right? Caesar says this, right? But no sooner does that happen than Caesar gets killed, right? He gets assassinated, right? So it's just this giant mess of always this fight over the throne, fight over the throne, fight over the throne. So when Caesar gets assassinated, now, guess what? Hyrcanus and Faisal and Herod, they were loyal to Caesar, but now they've got to pay homage to Marcus Antonius because he has been appointed leader of the East. Now, the good news was, because Marcus Antonius had been an ally of Caesar, that was reasonably easy to do. The right type of a bribe, the right type of homage, no big deal. Antony reconfirms Hyrcanus as high priest and Faisal and Herod as governors of Jerusalem and Galilee. But no sooner does this happen than Antipater gets murdered, okay? And then I got to think of his name. It's not literally Aristobulus himself. It's Antigonus, who is his son, comes in at the front of a Parthian army and invades Judea. Okay.
Okay.
So, because now, like we've said, you had Antipater, who is the real power behind Hyrcanus' throne. But Antipater gets his two sons, Faisal and Herod, appointed governors of Jerusalem and Galilee with eyes on the Jewish throne. Okay? But now Hyrcanus' brother, Aristobulus, his son, along with the Parthian army, invades Israel and drives the Romans out.
Got it.
Okay? So now you've got, and Antipater by this point is dead. Antipater's been assassinated. Okay? So in very Game of Thrones fashions, poisoned, if I remember. Okay?
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to you, and all I can think of is Game of Thrones.
It's hard not to, because the comparison is really stunning, and this is real.
Yeah,
I mean, this
actually happened.
This actually happened, and not only did it actually happen, but it actually happened around the most important king ever.
Yeah, and you have what? Roman records and other secular records that
Yeah,
back all this up.
Exactly. You've got all kinds of historical references that back this up, and as a matter of fact, we are finally, after years and years and years of research, getting much more documentary evidence about the Parthians, because they did not write down their history the way other cultures did. So it's taken us some time to decipher their history and find the documentary evidence that we need to understand what happened in and among the Parthians. But yeah, that sets the story for who that really, I mean, here we are, we're already halfway through the show. That really sets the stage for who is Herod, because you really don't know who is Herod unless you know this, right? Because what happens at this point is that Hyrcanus, Faisal, and Herod, they've got to adapt. They've got to improvise, overcome, adapt. They got to do something, because the Parthians now control Judea, okay? So Hyrcanus and Faisal, they go to negotiate with Antigonus and the Parthians. That does not go well. Herod stays in the rear in case everything goes sideways, which it did. So that was a smart move, okay? So when everything goes sideways and it becomes very obvious that this is not going to resolve itself through negotiation and that Herod's life is at risk, I think he'd had his first wife, maybe his second wife by this point. I forget if he was married to Mariamne yet or not, but he definitely had his first wife by this point. He might have had his second wife by this point, but he puts them in the fortress at Masada, okay? Leaves them there with a small army, and then he takes off for Petra, okay? Now, Petra, this is another thing that people don't know, is that to the east of the Bible lands, of Judea, to the east of Judea, at that time would have been a location called Nabatea, okay? Really what would be modern-day southern Jordan, okay?
Yeah.
But it would have been called Nabatea at the time, and I don't know if it was the capital or not, but it was definitely the trade center of Nabatea, was the city called Petra, okay? And Herod's mother was a Nabatean, okay? So Antipater was an Idumean, his mother was a Nabatean, and Herod now, therefore, is half Idumean and half Nabatean. He doesn't have a drop of Jewish blood.
Right.
Okay, which that's
not a good thing if you're
not
a
a good
Jew
thing if
looking
you're
at
going to be
this.
the king of the Jews, right?
Yeah.
But back to our story, Faisal and Hyrcanus take off to go negotiate. Doesn't work. Everything does go sideways. Herod puts his family at Masada and then takes off for Petra to try to get allies to go to war to drive the Parthians out. Doesn't work. So he takes off from Petra and he heads for Alexandria, Egypt, because he has already visited Rome and Mark Antony is a personal friend. Okay. Just in his upbringing so far, he had already been to Rome and knew Mark Antony. So he takes off to Alexandria, Egypt, because by this point in time, Marcus Antonius is hanging out with Cleopatra. So now he's going to go to the Romans for help, right? So he goes to Alexandria. He meets with Cleopatra. Marcus Antonius is not there. Marcus Antonius is back in Rome. So Cleopatra puts him on a ship, sends him to Rome. Meanwhile, he en route to Rome, he gets word that his brother Faisal has either been murdered or has committed suicide. We're not sure exactly which it is. He may have committed suicide because he was going to be executed. So it's kind of one and the same, right? And that also that Hyrcanus had been disfigured because the official title is high priest. And if the high priest has a physical imperfection, he can't be high priest. Okay. So Antigonus made sure that Hyrcanus was disfigured so that he could not be high priest anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So, but Herod gets word that it's really gone sideways now. His brother is dead. Hyrcanus has been disfigured, and he lands in Rome and goes to find Marcus Antonius. And Marcus Antonius takes him to meet Octavian. Okay. Now, Octavian, to put the pieces of the puzzle together, is Julius Caesar's grand nephew. And during Julius Caesar's lifetime, somehow, we don't know precisely sure, the two of them became very close, that Julius Caesar and Octavian, Gaius Octavian, just became really, really, really close because Caesar didn't have any male heirs. So he adopted Octavian and declared him to be his heir. Okay. And so therefore Octavian took the name Caesar. It wasn't his real name. He adopted it. He became Octavian Caesar because he was Julius Caesar's adopted son. And then later he was given the title Augustus by the Roman Senate. So then he became simply known as Caesar Augustus. Okay. But his given name when he was born was Gaius Octavian. Right. So if you ever hear anybody talking about Octavian, it's the same guy. Right. But Marcus Antonius takes Herod to meet Octavian, and all he has to do is tell him that Antipater came to Julius Caesar's rescue in Egypt, and Octavian and Herod are instantly friends.
Right.
Instantly. They are instantly political allies. Now, over time, we come to find out that Octavian did not like Herod at all. Okay. Just didn't like him at all. But political ally, he had to be a political
He's
ally.
more valuable as a political ally.
Yeah, absolutely. Because everybody, I have to be careful choosing the right words here because I don't want to glorify the work of the enemy. Okay. But at the same time, you want to talk about brilliance on the world stage to get this all set up for the birth of Christ, right? And when you think about the providence of the one true God, when you think about the providence of the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, he let these world powers get away with this junk to get it all set up so that we have this just outrageously amazing epic story about the exchanging of thrones all throughout the region. And then, the creator of the universe is just going to quietly sneak his son in the back door in this tiny little backwater town called Bethlehem. It's just amazing. You got these world empires just killing each other and trying to gain power. And then God is just, watch this, hold my beer, watch this, and just sneaks Jesus in the back door. Just amazing. So, what you kind of know, even if you don't know, what happens next, which is that Octavian and Marcus Antonius, they take Herod before the Roman Senate and say there would be no better king of Judea than this guy here. And when it comes to client kings and what the Romans needed of a client king, they were right. They were just absolutely right. Herod was the most perfect client king you could ever hope for.
Why was that?
Well, the reason, number one, he was an accomplished military leader, okay, already at a very young age. He's not very old, right? He's a whopping 30 years old at this point.
Okay.
Maybe 32 if you stretch it, right? But when he was appointed governor of Galilee, one of the first things he had to do was he had to mop up all the organized crime in the area, which he did, right?
Okay.
And he even got called before the Sanhedrin because he was pretty fond of just killing them outright. Okay. He wouldn't just hunt them down and capture them. He'd kill them. Okay. And because capital punishment was a religious crime overseen by the Sanhedrin, right?
Okay.
And this tells you about Herod, right?
So the Sanhedrin wasn't upset that he was killing him. It's just who was.
No, they were terribly upset that he was killing him.
Yeah.
I mean, on one hand, they loved the fact that he was dealing with all the brigands, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, they were thrilled with the fact that he was mopping up all the crime in the area. But what they were very upset about was he was violating Jewish law.
Right.
Okay, because Jewish law was the Sanhedrin determines who gets put to death, not the governor of Galilee, and not a non-Jewish governor of Galilee, by the way, right? So the Sanhedrin called Herod to appear before them because they're going to put the screws to him and say, what do you think you're doing, right? Well, Herod showed up. Number one, he showed up dressed in purple from head to toe. Okay, so he's decked out as
in royal colors,
royalty, right? And he brought his personal bodyguard. Okay, now his personal bodyguard. Well, I don't know how many of his personal bodyguards showed up at the meeting with the Sanhedrin, but it was enough that it shut them down.
Right.
They just went, okay, there's nothing we can do. Herod has made his intentions completely clear that he's just, whatever we say, he's not going to go along. He's not going to comply, right? And like I said, I don't know how many of his bodyguards showed up at this meeting. What I do know, however, is the size of his bodyguard.
It was enough to intimidate them.
Yeah. Well, his personal bodyguard was 300 cavalry. Okay. And in that day and age, you only became a cavalry soldier, okay, if you were the best. They were the special forces of their day. Cavalry were the special forces. You had to be at least 6 feet tall and at least 225 pounds. You had to have been raised on the back of a horse. You couldn't have learned to ride when you were 20. If you hadn't been riding since you were 4, you didn't qualify, right? Which ironically, ready for this, ironically, that means that the vast majority of the cavalry in this day and age were not Mediterraneans. They were not, certainly weren't Jews. They weren't Idumeans, right? They were Nabateans, okay? They were Arabs, right?
Interesting.
Or they were Parthians, okay? Or, ready for this, or they were Europeans. Herod had Germans and Gauls in his personal bodyguard. Germans, like Germans in his personal bodyguard. And French, Gauls, French in his personal bodyguard because they qualified, see? And what probably happened, we don't know this for sure, but probably what happened is that they got recruited by Caesar all the way back then, right? Because what Herod was doing was he's copying the Roman model. That's what he's doing all day long. He's just copying the Roman model. But at any rate, he mops up Galilee. He gets called before the Sanhedrin. Then the Parthians invade all this stuff. He goes to Petra. He goes to Alexandria. Now he's in Rome. The Senate is appointing him king of the Jews. And he's the perfect king, the perfect client king. You asked the question, why is that? He's an accomplished military leader. This is why. He is a shrewd politician, right? And he is outright cruel. He will not hesitate to murder his enemies, right? I mentioned a minute ago that we learned as the story moves forward, we learned that Octavian and Herod didn't like each other very much. And there's a very famous quote. I can't do it in Greek because it's in Greek, it's a pun. So that's why it's so funny. And it's serious too. It's both humorous and serious at the same time. But if you can recite it in Greek, there's a pun involved. But if you translate it into English, it says
it's lost.
It's not lost. You still get it, but you don't get the subtlety, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a quote by Octavian who said, "It is safer to be Herod's pig than to be Herod's son." Okay, that's because the word for pig and the word for son in Greek sound alike. So there's the pun. It's safer to be his this than this. The word for son is huios. I just don't know what the word for pig is, right? So it's something similar. So it's safer to be his pig than to be his son, which is really amazing because pigs were unclean animals. So it's this gigantic, weird cultural insult and quote and everything all at the same time. Pretty funny. But they appoint Herod king of Judea.
Right.
But now in our story, take note, they don't have it to give. Rome's not in charge of Judea at this point. They just got pushed out by the Parthians, and Herod had to flee for his life. And now he's standing in front of the Roman Senate, and the Roman Senate appoints him king of Judea.
So this would be like somebody saying, I just gifted you the Empire State Building, but they don't own the Empire State Building, and so they really can't give it to you.
Yeah, exactly. Well, they could in a way, in that this is just kind of how things worked back then. You've got major empires. You got two superpowers. Pardon me. You got two superpowers gobbling up land as quickly as they can, right? And then even if they don't control the land, they want to control whoever the vassal king is, right? See? So you've got Rome. Oddly enough, a lot of people don't know this. There was a vassal kingdom directly north of Judea called Emesa, Emesa, right? In what today would be Syria and a little bit of Lebanon, okay? So that was a client kingdom of Rome, okay? Nabatea was also a client kingdom of Rome. And now you've got Judea becoming a client kingdom of Rome, right? So this is common political maneuvering of the day and time, is that even if they didn't directly control the land, which is why, see, Judea did not become a Roman province until 6 AD. And I'll say a little bit about more of that in just 1 second here. But yeah, Judea was not originally a Roman province. It was a Roman client kingdom, which was, if they didn't control it directly, they'd control it indirectly. So what the Romans did, however, is that, number one, Herod had his own army. Herod had his own army that he recruited back home. And the strength of his army, I don't know if his army was at its peak at this time, but it was about to be. Within the next couple of years, his army was going to be at its peak. Herod's army is estimated to be at about 30,000. And then I had this wrong for years. Somewhere along the line, I came across a factoid that has turned out to be factually inaccurate. So here I am on screen, on the internet, officially recanting my previous position and getting the facts straight, because that's what good research means. I had heard years and years and years ago that the Romans gave Herod 11 Roman legions to retake Judea from the Parthians. And that's not true. They didn't give him 11 Roman legions. Number one, the Romans did not loan out their legions as general practice. It would take an extraordinary event for the Romans to loan a legion to anybody and put them under somebody else's command. But in this case, they did. But it was 2 legions. It wasn't 11, it was 2. And maybe it was the Roman numeral 2. I have no idea. Maybe that's why I misunderstood. But at this point, there would have been Roman legions in the region, okay, in Roman Syria, under the command of Mark Antony, okay, because he was in charge of Roman Syria. So when they gave Herod the kingship of Judea, now Herod's got to go back to Judea, and he's got to ramp up his army, and then they're going to loan him a couple of legions. And they did put a Roman general in charge of those legions, but then between the two of them, it takes 3 years. It takes 3 years, but they succeed in driving the Parthians from Judea so that Herod officially takes his throne in 37 BC. So now you see, and it's funny thing is, we haven't said a word about Herod the Great at the time of the birth of Christ, because to know who is Herod is really all contained in the backstory. If you know the backstory, now you know who Herod is.
Now, isn't he the one that totally revamped Caesarea?
Yes.
And he totally rebuilt Caesarea.
Well, it wasn't rebuild it. It didn't exist.
It didn't exist. Okay.
Yeah. I've got an entire book on the subject that prophetically my sainted mother gave to me when I was like 15 years old. The book is called Caesarea on the Sea. Because
Mhm.
Caesarea, by the way, obviously that's an honorific. That's naming the city after Caesar, right?
Right.
It's Caesarea, right? Okay. So Caesarea on the sea in Latin is called Caesarea Maritima, okay,
Mhm.
because it means Caesarea on the sea. One of Herod's sons, Herod Philip, he's the one that built the Caesarea that is by the Sea of Galilee that we
Mhm.
read about in Jesus's adult ministry. When it says Jesus went to Caesarea, that's a
Mhm.
different Caesarea. That's
Okay.
Caesarea Philippi, because it was there you go, two honorifics. The city of Caesar built by Philip, Herod Philip, the son of Herod the Great.
Got
Okay.
it.
So that's Caesarea Philippi. So you do have different Herods and you got different Caesareas, right? But yeah, Caesarea Maritima, Herod. So that's another reason why Herod was such a magnificent client king, was he was an extraordinarily ambitious and talented builder. He was really good at it. So
Yeah.
he built a port city.
The ports themselves, from what I've read, were just magnificently engineered.
Well, yeah, they were, because, like we said, Caesarea Maritima did not exist.
Mhm.
Um, Judea did not have a deep water port, and Herod
Mhm.
knew this. So they needed a deep water port where heavy ships could come in and dock, okay,
Mhm.
and therefore unload their cargo and turn Judea into a legitimate trading center, right?
Got it.
So in the port, so he had to create a port, right? In order to create the port, he had to create a backwater. And Herod and or Herod's engineers, they knew how to manufacture a compound that they would put it in, they would make a giant wooden frame, and they would pour this mineral compound into this giant wooden frame, and they'd put it on a boat, and they would float it out into the harbor, and then they'd sink the boat. and
Wow.
and these minerals would drop this entire thing to the bottom of the ocean, right, the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, and then the salt water would catalyze the minerals and create a breakwater.
Wow.
Yeah, so
Amazing.
it's just absolutely stunning what these guys did. I mean, it's really
Yeah, what
really
they could
amazing.
do.
But
It's
yeah, this
amazing.
is who is Herod. This is Herod. Herod
Yeah.
was this amazing character. I mean, he was a tyrant and an evil man, make no mistake. Me sitting here calling him amazing doesn't mean I'm talking about how cool he was. But talk about talented, military leader, political leader, shrewd politician,
Yeah.
manipulator,
I
athlete. He was a
yeah.
major proponent of the Olympics,
Yeah,
right?
I got about 4 minutes
Yeah.
roughly.
Hmm.
So let's wrap this up with some final thoughts, and we'll have to do a part two with this.
Absolutely. So some final thoughts are this, which is that now we know who is Herod. Okay, we've told you the backstory to the point where now you're going, okay, now I got a beat on this guy. Now I know what this guy was like. He's a tyrant. He's super intelligent. He's super talented. He's super shrewd. He's ultra cruel. He will murder someone at the drop of the hat. And here you go. He is not legitimate Judean royalty, but he marries legitimate Judean royalty.
He
So you
marries
want
in.
to talk about Game of Thrones? Oh
Hmm.
boy, you just created two factions going against each other like you wouldn't believe, because you've got anybody and everybody who hates Herod is now ready to get on the side of his wives and
Hmm.
his children who have a better claim to the throne than he does.
Right, a much better one.
Much better claim, which is why this is called God Save the King, because Herod spends the next 35 years defending his throne against any challenger. Doesn't matter if it's one of his kids, doesn't matter if it's a foreign empire, it doesn't matter who it is. He is going to kill them. He also betroths his sons and his daughters to other dignitaries in the region. And this is why when the Parthians show up, right?
Hmm.
And remember, this isn't three wise guys on camels, okay? This is an official ambassadorial entourage of Parthian magi coming to install the true king of the Jews. Because that was your question right away at the very beginning of the show.
Yeah.
Why would he care? Why would he even care? Well, this is because the magi, okay, and this is the other show, is who were the magi, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Is because part of their job was they oversaw royal succession in their empire. It was the magi who determined who the new king would be, okay?
Right.
If the king of Parthia dies, it's the magi who determine who the next king is going to be, and guess what just happened? The king of Parthia is dead. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Magi are looking for not just the new king of Parthia, they're also looking for the new king of the world because they discovered it in the stars. But this is their job description.
They date back to
at
Daniel.
least to at least Daniel, and probably further.
Yeah. It's amazing. So, I mean, what you're talking about, not 3 guys coming in on camels, but from what I've read, there could have been 7,000 or 8,000 people, mostly military, coming into the city, and Herod's going, "Oh no."
Yep, because that's
being deposed.
Exactly. Well, that's that scripture in Matthew chapter 2 that we blow right by. We blow right by it, and we don't even pay attention. It says that the Magi showed up. They asked, "Where is he who was born King of the Jews?" In other words, where's the legitimate king, right?
Yeah.
And it says, "And Herod and all Jerusalem was greatly troubled."
Mm-hmm.
Whoa! Stop! Wait! Time
out.
Talk
about understatement, huh?
Yeah. Herod and all 30 Jerusalem seconds, by the way, 30
is
greatly troubled because, like you said, he thinks they're being invaded. He's fought the Parthians before. They're coming to depose him and install somebody else.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Yep.
But we'll get to a part 2 where we'll pick up from where we left off here and talk about what was going on when the Parthians showed up, and because it is really, really amazing. And to me, it's really amazing to see, how much which you have left over from going all the way back to Alexander the Great, how much of an influence there still is in our modern world, how much of that is still, there's traces of it that still impact us in ways that we don't even understand. But folks, I'm Kevin Gallagher for Tim Kynes. I'm really, really happy to have Tim here, and I'm really glad that you're watching. We'll get to part 2 of this very fascinating subject next time. And folks, you can see us every Friday night, 8:30 p.m., every Monday morning at 11 a.m. on Channel 23. You can catch us on YouTube and other places, anytime you want, 24 hours a day. And we also play the audio of these shows on the Truth Be Told Radio Network, Friday nights at 9 p.m. So check it out there. Hey, everybody, thank you for watching. I'm Kevin Gallagher. Bye-bye.